It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, more than 1,700 prisoners released early in England and Wales to avoid the collapse of the criminal justice system. The government says it had no choice but to free the prisoners, who have served less than half of their sentences. But there are concerns, including among the prisoners themselves, that reoffending is inevitable and claims some of their victims weren't informed of their release. Coming up, I'll be speaking to a woman who was attacked by her former partner. He was convicted just last year, but is now due to be released early because of a loophole. Also tonight, a coroner finds no causal link between the Jeremy Kyle show and the death of Steve Diamond. Mr. Diamond took his own life 7 days after filming an episode of the programme that was never aired. Today it was ruled that the show was a possible factor in his death, but not the probable cause. Plus, heading down under, we'll have the details as Buckingham Palace announces plans for the King and Queen to visit Australia and Samoa next month. And The Boy Who Lived Again. The search begins for the next Harry Potter for a new big-budget TV adaptation. Well, that's come, and much more on the UK Tonight. More than 1,700 prisoners were released early in England and Wales today, despite having served less than half their sentences, and fears, including among the prisoners themselves, that they will reoffend. The government says it had to act. The Justice Secretary saying overcrowding has pushed prisons to the point of collapse. But there's anger tonight amongst victims, some saying they weren't even informed of their offenders' release. And shockingly, some domestic abusers have become eligible for this early release scheme because they weren't convicted of what ministers have deemed specific domestic violence offences. With more, here's our home editor, Jason Farrell.
Released into freedom early, only because behind these walls the system is at breaking point.
This place is crowded in there, man. It's crazy, man, yeah?
As soon as the space comes out on the wing, whatever wing you're on, whatever space comes up, it's filled within minutes.
There wasn't one space on the wing, not one space.
It's a chance to turn their lives around or go back to their old ways.
Do you think you've turned your back on crime?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
You guarantee you won't be back in?
Yeah, man, you're not going to see me back here still.
You have to rehabilitate yourself in there.
Yeah?
I did that. I changed, yeah.
I don't want to reoffend. I don't think I reoffend, like, as in committing crime, but getting recalled, probably 99%, yeah.
What he means is he expects to break his parole conditions and get sent back. And how often that happens is just one variable that will determine whether this scheme can turn around the woeful situation in our crowded jails.
This couldn't be more unpopular with the public, but the Justice Secretary told me that the alternative was unthinkable. Doing nothing would break the justice system because judges wouldn't be able to sentence new criminals because there would be nowhere to house them.
But releasing hundreds of prisoners applies pressure in other places.
Our members would do their level best to ensure that public safety is paramount in processing an early release, but I can't stand here and say it's not without risk. So one of the problems is that we weren't widely consulted or appropriately consulted on the mechanics of the scheme.
The early releases happen in two batches. Those with sentences below 5 years released today, longer sentences in late October. Two pinch points on the system.
Like the other prison officers just told me, they said, like, the prisoners they're letting out now are taking up all the cash housing. So I think it's 22nd of October when they're letting out the rest. There's no housing for them.
Housing released prisoners is a key issue, and one reformed drug addict says her release without a home is putting her at risk.
All the work I've done on myself is just going to fall for nothing, and I just feel like prison's supposed to rehabilitate you. I've done the work to change my life, rehabilitate myself. But if I'm getting put back on the streets, then it's all for what?
For most crimes, there is a victim, and while terrorists, sex offenders and very violent criminals will not be released, charities warn that some domestic abuse offenders are coming out.
We know that not all domestic abuse perpetrators will have been exempt from the scheme, so some will slip through the nets, as it were, and will be released early. And this is a really worrying time for survivors of domestic abuse.
Inmates have discarded their prison clothes, but will they change? The Chief Inspector of Prisons described this scheme as risky. Will it be a risk worth taking? The government says it had no choice. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, let's explore now how this might affect the victims of criminals released early. I'm joined by Elizabeth Hudson, who was attacked by her former partner and discovered last week that he may be eligible for early release. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time this evening. You received a letter from the Ministry of Justice out of the blue saying that you may well have seen media speculation, so they wanted to tell you that, yes, your former partner could be eligible for early release as soon as perhaps December of this year, maybe June of next. How did you feel when you read that letter, Elizabeth?
Shocked. It was initially a load of shock, then incredible anger, and then a great deal of upset and reliving the trauma that I've tried so hard to put behind me, and suddenly there it was back in black and white in front of my face again with no warning.
If you can, I think it's important to underline the seriousness of what happened to you that resulted in your ex-partner going to prison. So people tonight can be in no doubt about how you're feeling at the prospect of him being released early.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I missed that, the first part of that question.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea of what you went through for your former partner to be sent to prison? What happened to you? It's important for people to understand how you're feeling tonight at the prospect of him being released early.
It's my ex-husband. We were together for 15 years. It was an incredibly difficult relationship. I tried to leave him many, many times for various incidents. And then finally, in April 2021, he attacked me, punched me, hit me repeatedly, picked up a knife, held it against me, threatened to kill me, kill himself and orphan our children, slashed my arm with the knife. He turned away briefly, and I took that opportunity to dash for the front door, and luckily I managed to escape. And there was a neighbour in the driveway next door, so I managed to run to somebody for help. He tried to drag me back in, but didn't manage it. If I'd not managed to escape that morning, I don't believe that I'd be here talking to you today.
Elizabeth, you fought for his conviction and he was sent to prison, and the government has said that this scheme, there will be exemptions. Certain prisoners will not be eligible for early release, and that applies to those who have committed domestic abuse. However, your former partner qualifies for this scheme because his convictions for threats to kill and assault occasioning actual bodily harm are broader offences, not specific to domestic abuse. To anyone sitting at home tonight, what you have just described would be seen as domestic abuse, but under the law, he was not convicted of that, so therefore he could be out. How does that make you feel? Because, of course, the government have done this on one hand, and on the other hand have said, you know, they want to halve violence against women and girls within the next decade.
It's blatant hypocrisy for anybody looking at it. For a government to say that they want to have violence against women, for a government to say that they want to treat it as seriously as terrorism, to make misogyny a hate crime, it all comes across as incredible hypocrisy to me. How on earth can you say that you're putting the safety of women and girls front and centre of your policy making when you're prepared to let incredibly violent men out without even serving half of an inadequate sentence in the first place, in my opinion? My ex-partner, my ex-husband, didn't just attack me. He then went on to attack his new girlfriend while he was still on police bail for the attack on me. So that's a pattern of behaviour. I don't know how much more clear-cut you need it to be that it's domestic abuse, and yet, for whatever reason, it doesn't fall under the government's safeguarding.
Elizabeth, I just want to, if I can, bring up this letter on the screen as well, because it's very cut and dry. There doesn't seem to be any chance for you to appeal this decision on the grounds of what you have just said. In fact, it talks about the possible dates for your ex-partner's early release and then goes on to talk about licensing arrangements and what would you like, exclusion zones, and to let them know by the end of this month. In that sense, do you feel powerless?
Totally, and I think this is something that isn't coming across yet. We talk a lot about safety for victims, and absolutely we should be, that's absolutely right. But also, for many, many domestic abuse victims, the biggest challenge is that lack of control, that feeling that somebody else is in control of your life for many, many years in lots of cases. So when you start to recover, you start to take some of that control back. What the government have done with this policy is remove that control from domestic abuse victims yet again. And this is what I mean about re-traumatising victims, pushing them back, taking even longer for them to make the recovery that they need. It's so badly thought out. It makes me very, very angry.
Well, you're continuing your fight and your bravery by speaking to us tonight and highlighting this, not just on behalf of you and your family, but other victims out there who will be going through exactly what you're going through, if not right now, in the coming months, because, you know, this scheme is set to run for a while. But just in terms of what happens next, the letter makes it clear that your former partner will come under the supervision of the probation service. And the criticism has been that, yes, the prisons are full, get the prisoners out to make more capacity, but you're just pushing the problem further along. We're looking at a probation service that is stretched, and I'm going to talk about that with my next guest in more detail. But how safe does that make you feel tonight, knowing that your ex-partner will be under a service that themselves will admit, those who work within the probation service, is they can't cope now, let alone with an extra 1,700 plus prisoners being released today?
Yeah, we're in fantasy land. I spoke to the probation service when I got that letter and was told that it's absolute chaos, were the exact words that I was told. They're inundated with calls from very, very worried victims. That service can't cope already. These people that they're releasing, they won't have gone through proper rehabilitation processes either. And in most cases, I can imagine that it won't take long for them to be back inside where there aren't any more spaces. This is not solving the problem at all.
Elizabeth, I really thank you for speaking to me tonight. It's really important to hear from women like you. You know, you have 2 children to consider in all of this, as well as your own personal safety. It's that of your family. And as you've spoken about tonight, you know, the peace that you've had and the knowing of a specific date, to have that taken away from you and for it to be early is extremely unsettling. Thank you. We will keep in touch. That is Elizabeth Hudson there, whose former partner is going to be released early from prison, perhaps as soon as the end of this year. Elizabeth, thank you. We did ask the Ministry of Justice to respond to Elizabeth's case, and they gave us this statement to bring you tonight. This government inherited a justice system on the verge of collapse. The worst possible outcome for victims would have been to allow this to happen. Dangerous criminals would have walked the streets with impunity, knowing the police would not have been able to arrest them because there would have been no prison cell waiting for them. We have been forced into taking difficult but necessary action with safeguards in place so we can keep locking up offenders and protecting the public. Those released under this scheme will be subject to full probation supervision and will in many cases face tough restrictions such as tags, curfews and exclusion zones. Well, with so many prisoners being released, questions are being asked about the ability of the probation service to cope, as I was just discussing with Elizabeth there. Let's bring in Ian Lawrence. He is General Secretary of the Probation Service Union, NAPO. Ian, really good of you to talk to us tonight. Is this just pushing the problem onto your doorstep?
Well, look, let me firstly say there's not one of the members that I represent wouldn't have massive sympathy with the views of Elizabeth. And what I'd say is there's no option at the moment than to do other than the SDS 40 early release scheme for the reasons that the MOJ have laid out in the letter. But I'm not going to sit here and say this is without risk. And what ought to have happened is that Elizabeth would have had a longer lead-in time to be told about her ex-husband coming out, so that discussion could take place with the victim liaison support about the safeguards that Elizabeth would welcome. Because of the quantum numbers of people coming out today, 1,700 across the UK, it has not been possible to use that lead-in time. But there will be an increase in lead-in time as the scheme progresses. That's not a lot of help to Elizabeth and colleagues like her who are facing these issues. So I do sympathise personally with how
I mean, sympathy is one thing, and, you know, Elizabeth and women like her, victims of crime like her, they don't need sympathy, they need safety. And we just heard in detail there Elizabeth's story. She underwent a brutal attack. A man threatened to kill her. This is her former partner. What she needs is safety. And obviously he's coming out of prison early and being put in the hands of the probation service. And the real concern is that the probation service is so stretched. Can you keep women like Elizabeth safe?
We will try. I say we, our members working out there will try, but you've already alluded to the serious issues pertaining in the service. Not enough staff, not enough trained staff, vacancy rates through the roof, people exhausted through the overwork, people going off with mental health problems themselves. So we need a holistic look at the probation service, where it is in the criminal justice system, where it should be going. And it needs a rescue package financially, doesn't everybody, but this service most certainly does, so we can keep the public safe. All of our members are highly committed. As a union, we are zero tolerant to domestic violence and all forms of discrimination. So, you know, that's where the sympathy comes in. But you're right, we need politicians to act. And I'll be taking these issues directly up with the new Lord Chancellor, Shabana Mahmood. And we need another look at short-term prison sentences, because there are people in the system who haven't committed domestic violence but are languishing for 6 months to a year in prison, doing nothing particularly of use, costing us 80k a year. I want the probation service to supervise those people and leave room in the cells for those who present a real and present danger to the public.
Yeah, the concentration seems to have been on the creation of more capacity in the prison system. In the buildings we're looking at here, there's simply not enough room in those buildings for prisoners. But this emergency scheme, it won't solve overcrowding. It's just going to tackle capacity problem in the short term. We do need a longer term plan. Like I said, the concentration seems to be on building more prisons. Should it not be on, like you said, investing on the probation service? Are there other ideas, other long-term plans that we haven't yet heard from this government that could work?
It's a great question, because even previous Labour governments, that's a long time ago, Mark, the previous Labour government didn't heed the advice we were giving. You cannot build your way out of a prison crisis. You're going to be spending millions and millions, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' money, and simply those cells will be full up because you haven't got the community infrastructure out there, mental health services, drug abuse services, substance abuse services, and you can't recruit skilled probation officers to train them because there isn't enough money. So it's a vicious cycle, I get it. But that's why we need bold political decisions from this government. And Elizabeth, I can tell you, we're totally 100% behind your campaign. The imperative is to keep women, young girls, and society as a whole safe. But it's not going to happen unless we have bold political decisions from this government.
Yeah, you know, that may be reassuring to some people affected by this watching, and, you know, it's reassurance they need. What advice would you give to people who are worried? Because, you know, prisoners are released, many of them, you know, being put in your members' hands. We talk about, you know, tagging, restriction zones, all of those things that are meant to make victims of crime feel safe. How can you reassure people tonight that are affected by this about the system and how it works to protect them?
Notwithstanding the difficulties we've been discussing and the concerns that Elizabeth and other victims feel, probation never gets the credit for the thousands of lives that we do protect on a daily basis, with our members working massively long hours, under pressure, trying to cope with workloads through the roof. So we do positive work. And this is why we need a review of the probation service, because we do a lot of good things, but we could do more. We could do more with the right political support. And, you know, you'll hear every trade union leader say we need more money to do the things we want. Well, I'm no exception, but I know for a fact how good the probation service is at preventing reoffending, given the help it needs, how good it is at seriously protecting people. But we need time, we need space, and we need politicians to act, and act now.
Ian Lawrence, General Secretary of the Probation Service Union, NAPO. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really appreciate it. I'm sure we will talk again on this issue. Thank you. In other news today, Jeremy Kyle insists he has been fully exonerated after an inquest found that there was no causal link between his show and the death of Steve Diamond. A coroner ruling today that the show was a possible factor in Mr Diamond's death. Mr Diamond took his own life 7 days after filming an unaired episode, but it was not the probable cause. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer has this report from Winchester Coroner's Court.
My next guest today, Jane, is here to find out whether her partner Steve has indeed cheated on her.
Over the course of 17 series, millions tuned in to watch Jeremy Kyle unpick the messy personal lives of his guests. This was the episode which saw it taken off air.
Just so you're aware, you failed every single question.
Oh my God, I was never unfaithful.
While Steve Diamond was left visibly distressed after failing a lie detector test during the recording, a coroner has ruled that there's insufficient evidence it was a direct cause of his death. 7 days after taking part, he took his own life. While those closest to the 63-year-old said he was left distraught over the experience, the coroner citing Diamond's history of mental health problems, self-harm and previous suicide attempts as factors.
I find it quite interesting. I'm really sorry. You're better than that, by the way.
With hindsight, some critics have come to paint Jeremy Kyle as the devil incarnate for interactions like these. But the coroner finding there was no evidence that his words were a direct cause of distress.
In a statement, Jeremy Kyle has said, out of respect for Steve Diamond's family, he's remained steadfastly silent in the face of lies, false accusations and unfair criticism over the last 5.5 years. And that's taken a huge toll on him and his family.
Through lawyers, Steve Diamond's son, Carl, responding with this.
The only good thing that came of my father's death is the Jeremy Kyle show is cancelled.
I have not been unfaithful to her.
Why'd you fail the test?
While Diamond had rung ITV 40 to 50 times in desperate attempts to be allowed on the show, the broadcaster keen to stress the coroner's findings that it had comprehensive duty of care processes in place for guests, both during and after filming. TV tastes might have changed substantially, but Steve Diamond's inquest, a reminder of how it's all too easy for millions of us to tune in without thinking twice about the impact on those taking part. Katie Spencer, Sky News in Winchester.
And a reminder, there is help available from the Samaritans 24 hours a day. You can call 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Could more have been done to protect the victims of child killer Lucy Letby? A public inquiry has begun into the actions of the neonatal nurse, the conduct of her colleagues and the management culture in the wider National Health Service. The inquiry chair, Lady Justice Thirlwell, also used her opening remarks to criticise those who have questioned the validity of Letby's convictions. Well, Letby was originally convicted of murdering 7 babies, as well as 7 counts of attempted murder. She's currently serving 15 whole life orders after being convicted of the attempted murder of another baby girl on retrial. In May, the Court of Appeal refused her bid to challenge the verdict of the original trial, which led to questions about her defence team and the use of expert witnesses. Our Chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam attended the opening day of this inquiry in Liverpool and joins us now. Greg, talk to us about the parameters of this inquiry, what it's going to be looking at.
Well, what we heard today outlined pretty much the central question of this inquiry and the one at the heart of it. How was Lucy Letby allowed to kill and keep on killing for more than a year? And we heard from the counsel to the inquiry a number of incidents during that whole period. For example, after the first 3 babies collapsed and 2 of them died, Lucy Letby present at all 3 of those incidents. There was a meeting about concerns about this increased number of deaths. No action was taken. A year later, after there had been a number of other incidents, Lucy Letby present at all of them. Senior doctors were saying she should be removed from dealing with patients, but we heard today executives were happy for her to carry on dealing with patients in the face of those questions from senior doctors. There was a discussion at that time about whether the police should be called in, but that didn't happen for almost another year. So the central question from the counsel to the inquiry is, could Letby have been stopped earlier? Could more have been done? Were opportunities missed to detect her during all of that? Those are the key questions, and also whether the families of those babies were kept in the dark. Here's what she said.
One aspect of the parents' evidence involves what they were and were not told about the likely cause of deaths or injuries of their babies. What information were they given by the hospital in respect of any concerns about Letby's conduct? What were they told was being done about any concerns? Was the hospital candid with the parents? If not, why not? Was there a cover-up? If so, why? Was it more important to protect the reputation of the hospital than to take steps to protect babies or to get to the bottom of who might have harmed them?
Well, Greg, growing questions about Lucy Letby's convictions in recent weeks, even calls for this inquiry to be postponed.
Yeah, there's been this huge drumbeat online. A lot of amateur detectives have joined in. It's been going on for a while, posing questions about those two trials and whether Lucy Letby should have been convicted. Also from medical experts, statisticians who say the way the evidence was presented at those trials have made them concerned about the safety of that conviction. It's almost a parallel universe, what they're talking about and what this inquiry is talking about. And the inquiry chair made it clear today she will not be revisiting those questions of Lucy Letby's guilt.
In the months since the Court of Appeal handed down its judgment, there has been a huge outpouring of comment from a variety of quarters on the validity of the convictions. So far as I'm aware, it has come entirely from people who were not at the trial. Parts of the evidence have been selected and criticised, as has the conduct of the defence at trial, about which those defence lawyers can say nothing. All of this noise has caused enormous additional distress to the parents who have already suffered far too much. I make it absolutely clear that it's not for me, as chair of this public inquiry, to set about reviewing the convictions. The Court of Appeal has done that with a very clear result. The convictions stand.
Now, tomorrow we'll continue to hear the outline of what this inquiry will try to do. It will last until at least the end of the year.
Greg, thank you. You're watching the UK Tonight. Still to come, Buckingham Palace reveals details about what the King and Queen can expect on their first major overseas tour since His Majesty's cancer diagnosis. And the search to find a new Harry Potter, with the Wizarding World getting a new lease of life on the small screen.
To evict crazy Kamala.
Donald Trump is an unserious man.
The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
The American people deserve better.
She breaks everything that she touches.
Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes.
Kamala, who's a Marxist.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
Legal abortion!
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
The King and Queen will fly to Australia and Samoa next month for the King's first overseas tour since his cancer diagnosis. The royals will visit Canberra and Sydney, and the Commonwealth heads of government meeting in Samoa will be the King's first as head of state. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock has more.
They were last down under over 6 years ago. This will be the King's 17th official visit to Australia. It's also his first major overseas tour since his cancer diagnosis. Like all royal visits, it's a carefully planned diplomatic deployment, using the monarchy's so-called soft power, but now also factoring in the King's health.
The whole point of soft power is you're using attraction and persuasion to achieve your objectives or increase influence. And so the more he's seen to be liked, the higher his soft power ability is. If he had taken the throne 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been so effective. But I think there's also a lot of sympathy right now with his cancer diagnosis.
Australia has a long history of royal visits, but never from a reigning king. He is head of state and will be welcomed by the Australian Prime Minister, known for his Republican views. The King is also now head of the Commonwealth, and to that, the Samoa leg of the trip, where Commonwealth leaders are meeting. This 10-day tour is shorter than expected, but is still busy for a man undergoing regular cancer treatment.
Some thought this tour wouldn't happen, and certainly things have been scaled back. The trip to New Zealand was shelved, and we understand subtle adjustments have been made to the schedule to help preserve energies.
This will include rest time and no evening events in Australia. And perhaps his most poignant engagement, like this visit to a London hospital, meeting 2 leading cancer doctors in Sydney. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Still to come on the UK tonight. From riots to knife attacks, the shocking rise in child violence. I'm going to speak to a forensic psychiatrist about his work with young people who have committed the most serious of crimes. Now, from juveniles taking part in the recent riots to an epidemic in knife crime and attacks in schools, there seems to be a rise in the amount of violent crime involving children. So what is behind this seemingly never-ending upsurge in youth violence? Well, joining me now is Dr. Duncan Harding. He is a leading adolescent forensic psychiatrist. He works with young people who have committed the most serious of crimes. His latest book is called The Criminal Mind, and it attempts to get to the root cause of this issue. Duncan, really good to see you tonight. I'm fascinated to have this chat because I feel like, particularly here on the UK Tonight, we deal with a lot of the serious crimes that you are talking about in this book carried out by children, and is always seen as the most shocking and abhorrent of crimes.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why you wanted to explore this in this book.
Well, I got to a point in my career where it really felt as though I had a duty to do so. You know, I worked in adolescent forensic psychiatry across London for many years, and you see patterns forming, you see things happening which seem incomprehensible. And I guess I was on a journey, a personal journey, to try and understand the criminal mind and to try and understand why do children do these things. And it felt like I should open the lid on some of this and actually speak about it and hopefully create some kind of dialogue about it, because it really feels to me like it's a public health crisis. It's a crisis in the country. And it's, you know, when it happens, it's absolutely incomprehensible. But we have to try and find ways to understand. And that's what the book tries to do. It tries to help people form a framework of understanding so they might try to at least be able to think about the young person in a different way, to try to understand what's going on.
It's interesting you call it a public health crisis, because I feel that it hasn't been described like that, you know, children committing these kind of serious crimes, by any authority figure, by any government figure. Is that perhaps because children committing crimes is so abhorrent, it's so sensitive, and it's so complicated? And what do you think are some of the reasons that have made it such a crisis?
Well, I mean, I guess I come to it from a perspective as a doctor, and so perhaps it's a crisis in society, not necessarily just health. And it's not necessarily just that those kids who commit crime are unwell, either psychiatrically or physically. But I do think that kids are very vulnerable, and I do think that there's lots of kids who need a range of support around them, which speaks to each other, which isn't necessarily happening. I think this is a crisis. I mean, if you look at stats, it looks as though the figures are kind of coming down, but actually the proportion of violent crime seems to be increasing. And we haven't seen most recent figures yet. But I do think that this is something that we can at least as a society try to work out what is going wrong. What can we do to try and fix things?
Can we talk about knife crime? Because that is an epidemic in the UK. We talk about it a lot on the show. And it is children attacking other children. It can be fatal. And how do you get into the mind of a child that carries out a knife attack? Because it seems to be prevalent. It's not just a handful of children doing it. It is a growing number. And most of us can't understand how a child would see a life as so cheap to just attack a child with another knife, knowing the consequences could be death.
It's terrifying. And I mean, children are the fabric of our society, and the thought that children are out there with knives trying to kill or harm other children, other people, it's hard to imagine how that could possibly have happened. I do think it's something to do with, I mean, it has to be something to do with the child who is trying to harm, has to just dehumanise the other person, not see them as a human being in some way. And I think that, you know, it's not as easy to say. We'd like to say, I guess, as a society that it's to do with, that's a traumatised child, that's a child from a difficult background, and maybe it is. But I mean, in my clinical experience, I don't think that it's as straightforward as that. I think that, as I say, each case is very different. But for a child to actually stab another child, I mean, what would it take? It's incomprehensible. But I think my job is to try and remain neutral and to try and be compassionate. And I'm not saying that all offenders are victims. I'm not saying that. But I do think that in order to try and understand, we first have to, the starting point is to realise that the offender and the victim, we're all human beings in the world. And I think that there's so much division. And I do think that in society, at the moment, we've formed these tribes. And if you see, you know, in terms of gangs, it's one gang versus another gang. They seem to dehumanise the other gang. But even in society, we've formed these positions of like, I'm right and you're wrong. And these really strong kind of associations with something that we know is right and we know the other person's wrong. I think that's not healthy for children to pick up on.
How much does the online world play in what we're seeing happening with children and crime today? Because we live in very different times now.
Yeah.
Children live a lot of their life online, on devices, in different worlds. How much can that feed into the dehumanising of other children or, you know, whoever they may attack? Has that factored in your work? Have you come across that as a factor?
I mean, I think that online can be harmful for children, and it's because an online world can form an echo chamber for children. So if they've got a particular illness, they can find other people with that illness. It can make things worse. I think with regards to social media and crime, I think social media can be good. I'm not just saying social media is all bad, but I think that at the moment it does seem that there's a lot of division on social media and those divides are exacerbated. And I think that actually since COVID, where I think all of us had this sense of a lack of control over what was happening and what was going to happen to us. I think since then, we've really tried to bed down into the things we can control in life, the parts we can control about who we are, who the other person is. And I think social media exacerbates that. And I think what I find distressing about social media is this sense that you can be an armchair expert and say, I am right and you are wrong. And I think if ever in life you feel that you're right, you should kind of question that. But I think that that dichotomy of right and wrong, us and them, I think that that's not healthy for children. And I think that they can absorb all that. And obviously there's a lot of negative stuff that kids will see on social media, and they will pick up on the splits that are in the rest of society. And we're in a very divided society currently.
Well, Dr. Duncan Harding, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. Fascinating to talk to you because it is a question that comes up so often when we hear on Sky News cover these horrendous crimes with children as the perpetrators. The question is always, why? And as you said, the attacker as a child doesn't get treated perhaps with as much compassion as maybe they should. But it is very difficult. It's such a sensitive, sort of horrific attack. Thank you so much for talking to us. As you said, it's all about listening, isn't it? So really appreciate your time. Thank you. That's Dr. Duncan Harding there. His new book is The Criminal Mind. Thank you. Coming up here on the UK Tonight, producers are searching for a new generation of child actors to play Harry, Hermione and Ron. We'll speak to an actor whose life was transformed by the original Harry Potter films. And coming up in sport, Adrian Newey says he has joined Aston Martin to help lead them to the Formula One World Championship.
They've pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here. They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake might all be finished, I don't know.
Hello, welcome back. Still to come, TV producers are starting the search for the next generation of Hogwarts students. I'm going to speak to an actor whose life was changed forever when he was cast in the Harry Potter movies. But first, David is here with the sport. We're going to talk about the magic of Formula One and why Aston Martin are paying tens of millions of pounds for the services of one designer, one Mr. Adrian Newey.
I mean, the magic is a really apt way to put it, because this man is seen as a wizard. He's seen as a magician. Because he is a design guru, Adrian Newey, as you mentioned. And yes, you say tens of millions of pounds. A basic deal of £20 million a year rising to £30 million a year.
Wow.
This man has been with Red Bull since 2006 and obviously seen titles for Sebastian Vettel, 4 of them, and recently Max Verstappen, 3 of those. But his story goes way back to the 90s and Nigel Mansell and Damon Hill and other drivers like that. So he's got this incredible storied history, but such unique talent. There is no one like him in Formula One. He is unique. That's why Aston have put up quite so much money. But you talk about those numbers. You think about, what a driver must be earning, and it's kind of quite comparable. So, he's compared to, say, for example, what Lewis Hamilton might be earning at Mercedes and soon Ferrari, and also Fernando Alonso, who he himself said was kind of like an arch enemy for most of his time when he was with McLaren or Red Bull or other teams. This is a big, big bet from Aston Martin, and it is a real coup. Let's hear now from Adrian Newey.
I suppose I've put quite a lot of pressure on myself. Perhaps a little bit less than I used to as I've got older, but that pressure comes from within.
You start work March the 2nd, I think it is, next year. It's the building blocks. Are they all here to add to your tally of championships?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the facilities, then the facilities are certainly here. There's no doubt about that.
It's worth reminding everyone where we are in the Formula One calendar, the timing of this announcement.
Yeah, OK, so we're in the second half of the 2024 season, and Red Bull obviously in it with Max Verstappen leading, but he won't join Aston until next year, basically halfway through next year, springtime. And that is key because in 2026, the Formula One regulations change, the technical regulations change, and this is when someone like Adrian Newey can really put all his ducks in a row and design a car, help design a car, and make the most of the technique, just really understand it and visualise it from a completely different perspective to anyone else in Formula One. So I think that the timing is really, really key for Aston Martin, and they'll be hoping 24, OK, fine, 25, through that, and then 26. That's when we will start to see the results, potentially with the title-winning car, we will see. Formula One leading the headlines, but also plenty of rugby and also football news around this evening.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
May 2022, you described the one-day job as too cushy to contemplate. What's changed?
Look, I think firstly, I was very content doing what I was doing in terms of helping Stokesy run the test side. We've had a great couple of years, so I think we've achieved some pretty cool stuff, even though we're not the finished article yet. But when Kezi rang me and said, is there a world in which you can do it all? It didn't take a whole lot of persuading, to be honest, because I think, back then I didn't have a lot of information about English cricket. I felt at the time that white ball team was in a very good space, and they were obviously being very successful, and my skills are normally more towards trying to rejuvenate a side and try and bring about some soul and some structure of how you want to play the game. I guess you fast forward to now, I look around and I think I've had a couple of years where I've been ingrained in English cricket, understand the systems and the structures and the people, and probably most importantly, I understand the talent which sits within this country.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, the Harry Potter films changed the lives of their young stars, with previously unknown actors catapulted into global fame. And now another generation of young talent could be getting the same opportunity. The search is underway for the new Harry, Ron and Hermione, with open casting calls announced for the big-budget TV adaptation of J.K. Rowling's books. Joining us now, actor Chris Rankin, who played Percy Weasley in the Harry Potter movies. Chris, so good to see you. Very excited to have one of the Weasley family on the show tonight. We're looking at...
Favourite one.
Definitely. That's why I got you on, not the other ones. This is Harry Potter for a whole new generation. Can you remember when you auditioned for the films? Can you take us back?
I can, and Sarah-Jane, it was 24 and a half years ago, which is utterly terrifying. But I remember it incredibly well. Obviously, back in it was April 2000 that I first applied for my audition, and we didn't have social media back then. We barely knew how to use the internet. So I had to write a letter to BBC Newsround. That's how far back we're going. That's how far back we're going. Goodness me, look at that picture. But I wrote a letter to BBC Newsround, which was how they were advertising the auditions in those days, and said, look, I'm 16 years old, I've got ginger hair, and I'm a school prefect at my school, and I love acting and Harry Potter. I'm already Percy Weasley, give me the job. It wasn't as easy as that. They did ignore me for quite a few months. In fact, I think it was late August of the year 2000 that they finally got back to me, and I had a whirlwind audition process of literally 2 auditions, and then 24 years ago, I think this week, actually, we started filming. So when it happened very, very quickly.
Yeah. Just looking at the casting call for this new generation, for the TV series, they're actually asking for the initial applications online. As you said, a lot's changed in 24 years, and now the children have to... I think they have to write a poem, not about Harry Potter, and perform that on camera and send it in. How different is that for an actor? Because presumably a lot of these children, like your good self and Daniel Radcliffe at the time and the like, had no acting experience. This was their first shot, and what a shot it was.
Well, that's exactly it. I think this is why they've done it like this, where the kids can, I think, read a poem or tell a story or something. Not Harry Potter. They've been quite clear about that. But I think it's about engaging that fun and that element of enjoyment, which is what acting's about, especially when you're sort of 9, 10, 11 years old, which is the age of kids that they're looking for these main 3 characters. But it should be fun. It has to be fun for these kids involved, and it could potentially be quite a long casting process for those 3 that eventually end up taking the roles, which I imagine they'll be starting to film probably later on in 2025. So it's going to be a long process. And for those kids that get sort of slowly further and further down the line, it's got to be enjoyable. And for those kids that get the parts, of course, they're going to be in it for, well, let's face it, for life, if we're honest.
Can we talk about the life-changing aspect of this? Because this isn't just any old TV drama they're auditioning for. This is Harry Potter. It is a global phenomenon, the magic of which... is still there. It hasn't, diminished in the last 25-odd years. Can you give us an idea of what it's like to be in that Harry Potter world, preparing any young person who may be successful in this process?
I think, Sarah-Jane, it's fair to say that certainly I didn't anticipate that. Where are we? 24 years since we started filming, I would be talking about it still, let alone, still being such a huge part of it, and it's still being such a huge part of my life. Honestly, I'm now 40 years old, and there isn't a day that goes by where I don't have to and enjoy talking about Harry Potter and all the wonderful things that it's afforded me over the years, be it, different acting jobs, different opportunities to go to wonderful places, meet incredible people, and do, well, magical things, if you'll pardon the pun. But it's It's a lot of fun, and it is a wonderful world to be in. And the fans of the films and the fans of that magical, fantastical world are wonderful, wonderful people. So these kids that take all these parts they'll be in it for life. But if they do it right and they handle it right, and I hope they do, it'll be very different in this age of, you know, social media and TikTok and Instagram and everything else that's out there than it was for us, where, you know, we didn't really have all of that to contend with in the early 2000s through 2011. It was a different world for us, but I hope that it'll be a good and positive experience for them.
Oh, well, Chris, it's wonderful to speak to you, speaking in such glowing terms about the Harry Potter world. Chris Rankin there, of course, Percy Weasley in the Harry Potter films. And as we do know, you were an official redhead, but I know that the Weasley twins didn't really have red hair, did they? They had to dye it.
No,
don't be put off if you're not a redhead in
fakes.
applying for the Weasley family. Really good to speak to you, Chris. Thank you for joining us. That is the open casting for the Harry Potter TV adaptation. That's it from us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock.